From Alice's Adventures in Wonderland by Lewis Carroll, Chapter 10, The Lobster Quadrille. The Mock Turtle sighed deeply and drew back one flapper across his eyes. He looked at Alice and tried to speak. But for a minute or two, sobs choked his voice. Seemed as if he had a bone in his throat, said the Gryphon, and it set to work shaking him and punching him in the back. At last the Mock Turtle recovered his voice, and with tears running down his cheeks, he went on again. You may not have lived much under the sea. I haven't, said Alice. And perhaps you were never introduced to a lobster. Alice began to say, I once tasted, but checked herself hastily and said, no, never. So you can have no idea what a delightful thing the lobster quadrille is. No, indeed, said Alice. What sort of dance is it? Why, the Gryphon said, you first form a line along the seashore. 2 lines, cried the Mock Turtle. Seals, turtles, and salmon, so on. And then when you've cleared all the jellyfish out of the way, that generally takes some time, interrupted the Gryphon. You advance twice, each with a lobster as a partner, cried the Gryphon. Of course, the Mock Turtle said. Advance twice, set to partners, change lobsters, retire in the same order, continued the Gryphon. Then you know, the Mock Turtle went on. You throw the lobsters, shouted the Gryphon, with a bound into the air. As far out to sea as you can. Swim after them, screamed the Gryphon. Turn a somersault in the sea, cried the Mock Turtle, capering wildly about. Change lobsters again, yelled the Gryphon at the top of its voice. Back to land again, and that's all the first figure, said the Mock Turtle, suddenly dropping his voice, and the 2 creatures who had been jumping about like mad things all this time sat down again very sadly and quietly and looked at Alice. It must be a very pretty dance, said Alice timidly. Would you like to see a little bit of it, said the Mock Turtle. Yes, very much indeed, said Alice. Come, let's try the first figure, said the Mock Turtle to the Gryphon. And we can do it without the lobsters, you know. Which shall we sing? Oh, you sing, said the Gryphon. I've forgotten the words. So they began, solemnly dancing round and round Alice every now and again, treading on her toes when they passed too close and waving their forepaws to mark the time, while the Mock Turtle sang this very slowly and sadly. Will you walk a little faster, said a whiting to a snail. There's a porpoise behind us, and he's treading on my tail. See how eagerly the lobsters turn and turtles all advance. They are waiting on the shingle, and will you come and join the dance? Oh, will you, won't you, will you, won't you, will you, won't you join the dance? Will you, won't you, will you, won't you join the dance? You can really have no notion how delightful it will be when they take us up and throw us with the lobsters out to the sea. But the snail replied, too far, and gave a look of askance. So he thanks the whiting kindly, and he would not join the dance. Oh, would you, could you, could you not, would you not join the dance? Would not, could not, would not, could not, could not join the dance. What matters how far we go? His scaly friend replied. There is another shore, you know, upon the other side. The further off from England, the nearer is to France. Then turn not pale, beloved snail, and will you come and join the dance? Oh, will you, won't you, won't you join the dance? Oh, will you, won't you, won't you join the dance? Thank you very much. That was a very interesting dance to watch, said Alice, feeling glad that it was over at last. And so I do like the curious song about the whiting. Oh, as to the whiting, said the Mock Turtle, they you've seen them, of course. Yes, said Alice. I've seen them often at she checked herself hastily. I don't know what din may be, said the Mock Turtle, but if you've seen them so often, then of course you know what they're like. Oh, I believe so, replied Alice thoughtfully. They have their tails and their mouths, and they're all over crumbs. You're wrong about the crumbs, said the Mock Turtle. Crumbs would wash off in the sea, but they do have their tails and their mouths, and the reason is, and here the Mock Turtle yawned and shut his eyes. Tell her about the reason of that, he said to the Gryphon. The reason is, said the Gryphon, that they could go with the lobsters to the dance, so they've been thrown out to sea, so they had to fall a long way. So they got their tails fast in their mouths, so they couldn't get them out again. That's all. Thank you, said Alice. That's very interesting. I never knew so much about a whiting before. I can tell you much more than that, if you like, said the Gryphon. Do you know why it's called a whiting? I never thought about it, Alice said. Why? It does the boots and shoes, Gryphon said very solemnly. Alice was thoroughly puzzled. It does the boots and shoes, she repeating in a wondered tone. Why, what are your shoes done with? Said the Gryphon. I mean, what makes them so shiny? Alice looked down at them and considered it a little while before the answers. She said, they're done with blacking, I believe. Boots and shoes under the sea, the Gryphon went on in a deep voice, are done with whiting, Now you know. And what are those made of? Alice asked in a tone of great curiosity. Well, soles and eels, of course, replied the Gryphon rather impatiently. Any shrimp could have told you that. If I'd been the waiting, said Alice, whose thoughts were still running on the song, I'd have kept to the porpoise. Keep back, please. We don't want you with us. They were obliged to have him with them, the Mock Turtle said. No wise fish would go anywhere without a porpoise. Wouldn't it really? Said Alice in a tone of great surprise. Of course not, said the Mock Turtle. Why, if a fish came to me and told me he was going on a great journey, I would just say, well, what's the porpoise? Don't you mean purpose? Said Alice. I mean to say, the Mock Turtle replied in an offended tone, and the Gryphon added, Come, let's hear your adventures. I could tell you my adventures beginning from this morning, said Alice a little timidly, but it's not going back to yesterday because I was a different person then. Explain all that, said the Mock Turtle. No, no, the adventures first, the Gryphon said in an impatient tone. Explanations take a dreadful amount of time. So Alice began telling them her adventures from the time when she first saw the white rabbit. She was nervous about it at first, just as the two creatures had gotten so close to her, one on each side, and opened their eyes and mouths so very wide. But as she gained courage, she went on. Her listeners were perfectly quiet till she got to the part about her repeating, You are old Father William, to the caterpillar, the words all coming out different, when the Mock Turtle drew a long breath and said, That's very curious. It's all about as curious as it can be, said the Gryphon. And it all came out different? The Mock Turtle repeated thoughtfully. I should like to hear you try to repeat something now. Tell her to begin. He looked at the Gryphon, and if thought once more of some kind of authority over Alice. Stand up and repeat, "'Tis the voice of a sluggard," said the Gryphon. How the creatures order one about and make one repeat lessons, thought Alice. I might just as well be at school at once. However, she got up and began to repeat it, but her head was still full of the Lobster Quadrille that she hardly knew what she was saying, and so the words came out very queer indeed. "'Tis the voice of the lobster, I heard him declare, You have baked me too brown, I must sugar my hair. As a duck with its eyelids, and so with his nose, trims his belt with his buttons, and turns out his toes. When the sands are all dry, and he is gay as a lark, and will cry in contemptuous tones at the shark. But then the tide rises, and the sharks are around, his voice has a timid and tremulous sound." That's different from when I used to say it as a child, said the Gryphon. Well, I've never heard it before, said the Mock Turtles, but it sounds like uncommon nonsense. Alice said nothing, and she had sat down with her face in her hands, wondering if anything would ever happen in a natural way again. I should like to have it explained, said the Mock Turtle. She can't explain it, said the Gryphon hastily. Go on with the next verse. But what about his toes? The Mock Turtle persisted. How can he turn that out with his nose, you know? It's the first position in dancing, Alice said, but she was dreadfully puzzled by the whole thing and longed to change the subject. Go on to the next verse, the Gryphon repeated. It begins, I passed by his garden. Alice did not dare disobey, though she felt sure it would come out all wrong, and she went on in a trembling voice. It passed by his garden, and marked with one eye how the owl and the panther were sharing a pie. The panther took the pie crust and the gravy and the meat, while the owl had the dish and its share of the treat. When the pie was all finished, the owl, as a boon, was kindly permitted to pocket the spoon, while the panther received the knife and the fork with a growl, and concluded the banquet by... And what's the use of repeating all that stuff, said the Mock Turtle as he interrupted, if you don't explain it as you go on? It's by far the most confusing thing I've ever heard. Yes, I think you'd be better off to leave it, said the Gryphon, and Alice was only too glad to do so. Shall we try another figure of the Lobster Quadrille, said the Gryphon. Or would you like the Mock Turtle to sing another song? Oh, a song, please, if the Mock Turtle would be so kind, Alice replied, so eagerly that the Gryphon said in another offended tone, No accounting for tastes. Sing her turtle soup. Will you, old fellow? And the Mock Turtle sighed deeply and began, in a voice choked with sobs, to sing, Beautiful soup, so rich and green, waiting in a hot tureen, who for such dainties would not stoop? Soup of the evening, beautiful soup. Soup of the evening, beautiful soup. Oh, beautiful soup, beautiful soup. Soup full of the evening, beautiful, beautiful soup. Beautiful soup, who cares for fish and game, or any other dish? Who would not give else up for 2p pennyworth of beautiful soup? Pennyworth, only beautiful soup, beautiful soup, beautiful soup. Soup of the evening, beautiful, beautiful soup. Chorus again, cried the Gryphon, and the Mock Turtle had just begun to repeat it when a cry of "The trial is beginning" was heard in the distance. "Come on," cried the Gryphon, and taking Alice by the hand, it hurried off, without waiting for the end of the song. "What trial is it?" Alice panted, and she ran, but the Gryphon only answered, "Come on," and ran faster and more faintly, and carried on the breeze and followed them the melancholy words, "Soup of the evening, beautiful, beautiful soup."